Hey everyone, this is Andy, and in this video I'm going to be painting one of my favourite miniature ranges, Infinity the game. This video is sponsored by Corvus Belli, who are the makers of Infinity, and when they contacted I was very excited because, well, I like Infinity. I've painted a PanOceania team in the past, which I still have somewhere, and I've actually used that for gaming, but I've also painted some Infinity models for competition as well. So this is a sponsored video, but it's one I'm very happy to do because I love Infinity anyway, and it's such a great excuse to go back and paint something I'd really like to try again. The latest release for Infinity is Operation Sandtrap, and it's an awesome box. It's got a team of PanOceania, which is my team, and I checked out the miniatures and I was really excited to do these. I haven't painted them for quite a few years, but this set looks really, really cool. These guys are the poster guys for Infinity, and it got me thinking, what would it be like comparing these to the poster guys for Warhammer 40k? And I often wonder why Infinity isn't more popular, because the miniatures are awesome, the game is great. So what I'm going to do in this video, I'm going to paint one Ultramarine and the one of the miniatures from Operation Sandtrap, and I'm just going to compare them, just the experience of painting them, what they look like at the end, and I think it's got to be on an even playing field, so I'm going to paint them in exactly the same colours and method. My first job was preparation, and the miniatures are metal, and at first, maybe like you, I was thinking metal, I don't really think I want to do some metal miniatures, but I was really surprised at how good the casting is and how fast it was to clean them up. There are the usual mold lines, but because the material is so hard, it's really easy to scrape these off and polish them to get it really, really smooth. And to be honest, they were way quicker to prepare than plastic miniatures. They were so few parts, just, a body, a backpack, and two arms, that even with sanding and getting them, absolutely perfect, this was still way quicker than doing a Games Workshop kit. And that was really cool. So I was a little worried about doing a metal miniature, but it was a really, really pleasant experience. So definitely don't be put off if metal is something you don't want to work with. I did use some pins to make sure it was really secure, but this was pretty overkill, to be honest. I just wanted to see how easy it was to drill into the metal, and even doing this, my prep time was pretty quick. I went for a grey primer, and this just sticks to the mini really well. It gives a great finish. I'm using an automotive primer from a car shop called Halfords in the UK, and I like grey. It's just a nice middle ground for the colour scheme we're going to be doing. My Ultramarine has had the chest sanded down so it looks a bit cooler, and I've also used a Mark 7 helmet as that is my preference too. One thing I love about Infinity is the art direction they've gone in, and some of the artwork in the new Sandtrap box set is really, really cool, and I love the colour scheme they have in here. There's some kind of pink rose coloured lenses, a really nice looking blue, and the orange. So I really, really like the scheme, and I want to try and go in a similar direction. Looking at these artworks really made me want to paint the miniatures, and it was really nice just kind of flicking through before I got stuck in. I'm going to paint the blue in a very simple way. I don't own many blues, but this Calgar blue seemed to fit the bill, and I'm going to use Cantor blue to darken it down, and you could use something in between as these are quite far apart, but I'm just going to gradually add Cantor blue until I get something dark enough. I'm going to be using an airbrush, but you can totally do this by hand. I'm going to be not doing anything crazy with the airbrush, just base coating it. And I'm trying out a prototype for a new Ultra airbrush, which will be coming probably sometime next year. I put some Calgar blue in the airbrush, and I added just a tiny bit of the Cantor blue, and you don't need to be precise with this. So long as it's a tiny bit darker than Calgar, I think it's going to be fine. I then started to carefully airbrush over all of the miniatures in this flat colour, And my kind of idea for painting these miniatures is I want them to be painted in a very simple way, so you could, get them on the table quickly. I think the box arts for Infinity are amazing, but it's quite hard to follow this if you're new to the hobby or just want to kind of get them done and on the table. So I thought I'd try something a little different, use some metallics, do lots of battle damage, and yeah, just paint them how I would paint my army stuff. My hope is to make these awesome looking minis a bit more approachable and show that you can paint them in a simple way. I know I'm airbrushing them, but you could just base coat this colour all over and it would look great. But I have the airbrush and it's just going to speed things up for me. I added a little more Cantor blue and sprayed from below to give me a little bit of shading, and I'm not going to be doing any highlighting with the airbrush. I've done my lightest colour with the airbrush, so I'm just trying to add some shadows. If you're using a brush, you could just wash this into the recesses or try and shade down any parts you think that would be darker. If you mess any parts up, you can always go back and re-highlight with the first colour, and yeah, you can just kind of blend things in this way if you're airbrushing, and if you're brushing on, just re-highlight some parts. I want to block in pretty much all of the base coats now, and any parts that are going to be grey, I'm using petroleum grey from scale 75, and I like this one because it has a slight purpley tone, and I think that's going to go really nice with the ultramarine blue. I like to base coat with a grey and then wash with black, as opposed to starting with a black base coat and highlighting the grey. I think it's quicker to do it this way. I base coated any of the leather parts with brown leather from scale 75, and it's a nice orangey brown, so it's going to look nice against the blue. And again, I start with a paler one because I can wash this one down. I dilute some normal black paint rather than a black wash because I think that gets a strange looking finish, and I just run this into the recesses. It might look like I'm kind of base coating it again, but that's because it's wet. And it's really nice and thin, so when it's dry, it's going to have run into the recesses and just slightly toned it down a little bit. So a really nice, easy, quick way to get some shading on some black. I used burnt umber to wash the leather in the same manner, and we're going to use this burnt umber paint quite a lot, and it's a really versatile one. I really love the pink lenses that they've got in the artwork, and I thought Sunset Red from Vallejo would be a good match. So I base coated everything with this, and this took a couple coats to get it really nice and smooth. I'm kind of multitasking to make things more efficient, so I was waiting for the pink on the lenses to dry. I started working on the orange. I used this Chimera paint because it was super bright, it was the right colour I needed, and Chimera paints, when I've used them in the past, have been really good for coverage. And this one was good, but because it's an orange over blue, it still took me 4 or 5 coats to get it really smooth and opaque. But I think I might have over diluted it to make sure I didn't, get too much build up. In any case, they were just small details, so, it sounds crazy to do 4 coats, but it really didn't take that long at all. But this is why I like to multitask and kind of base coat and wash a few things at the same time. I put a little more attention into the lenses from the other parts, so I washed with some Warlord Purple from Vallejo Game Colour, and I really like this colour. It worked well with the Sunset Red. I then went back in with some Sunset Red, but this time I added some highlight colour, and you can use anything to make it brighter, like adding in some ivory, and I just added 2 steps of highlighting to get a nice kind of powerful glow and draw some attention to those eyes. And at this point the mini is starting to come together, so I started to add a little more detail. I added some brighter highlights of petroleum grey mixed with any lighter grey will do. I used some graphite, and I'm not really doing edge highlights here, I'm just focusing on all the large surfaces that face upwards and blocking in big areas to just show the shape of the gun really. You can see the orange on the shoulder pad, even though it took a few coats, is worth it because it's super bright and beautiful. So that was definitely worth it, and I really like that paint from Chimera. As an optional step, you can add some highlights to the blue. Now I used the Calgar blue and darkened it down, and I did this because now I can use Calgar blue on its own and start some highlighting. I'm going to focus on doing a rounded area highlight on the head just to draw some focus to that area. And I'm not really going to do any edge highlighting. I think edge highlighting looks amazing, but I just want to kind of, make you understand that this isn't compulsory. Don't feel like you have to do edge highlighting. I'm actually going to do battle damage to wear away the edges, and I think that means I don't really need to do a lot of edge highlighting. But you could leave it here at this step, the blue, but you can also add as much additional kind of care and attention as you feel like doing. But just don't ever feel like there's pressure to add a lot of highlights. You can just do a nice looking blue and then get gaming with your miniatures. I did some brighter highlights and I don't think they were necessary. I think it looked better before, so I ended up knocking those back. But yeah, a few quick highlights in important spots like the head, the arms, the knee pads. It did make a difference, and I wasn't sure if these were going to be the right blues that I chose, but I do really like them. Now moving on to the step most important to me, and that is the battle damage. And I wanted to paint my Infinity models with a lot of chipping and weathering, as we don't tend to see those on the box arts for Space Marines or Infinity stuff, but I always like to do heavily weathered things. And I did this blue very pale so that the battle damage would show up really well and also just contrast really nicely to all the black details. I'm using that burnt umber again, and I really like this color for chipping. And really I focus on the leading edges first. So I kind of do this instead of edge highlighting. So anything that's an edge facing forward that's really prominent, then we can just do some little chips, scratches, and you can actually use the side of the brush just like you would an edge highlight to wear away those edges where the paint has come off. This for me is the fun and enjoyable step, and I add a few chips, take a step back, then add a few more if I think I need them, just to make sure I don't overdo it. It really breaks up the plain surfaces like this shoulder here, and just catching the edge and adding little dots around it. Yeah, personally, I find it really satisfying, and yeah, I just think it breaks up the miniature, especially when you have large flat areas like this. I do the metallics last because I want to add some silver chips over the top of the brown ones sparingly, but I also use it on the black sections, and again this kind of replaces the need for an edge highlight because we can wear away the edges of the gun, and I pick out the rivets, and this is my personal preference on how I like to paint black for gaming minis. So I'm just adding depth and weathering with silver, and we're also going to do oil washes later, and that really helps for breaking up the black. On any of the really deep sort of chips you've done, or the parts that you think are really going to take a lot of battering, then I just add a little bit of silver on some parts of the brown chipping, and this just makes it look like a fresh chip, gives it more depth, and it also really picks it out as the silvers are nice and bright. Once that's done, then I really want to do some oil washing to add depth to the recesses and just to help with the weathered look. So I just put some tin foil over one of these little metal trays, which means I can just throw it away when I'm done. And then I use some Sans Odor from Winsor & Newton, which is an odorless thinner. And I just put a little dash in my tray. Then I grab a blob of my raw umber, and I just kind of put this on the side of the tray, and then I can just gradually add it to get the dilution I want. And sometimes it's nice to do really thin washes to kind of just tone things down and add a filter. Other times it's nice to do thicker ones for streaks and things like that. So you can just keep adding it and use it for different uses. I added some transfers to the Ultramarine, and so I wanted to put a filter to take away from the purity of that white. It's just, it's too perfect, the white. So just a thin filter of oil wash helps to tone that down. And I also run it around the recesses. I don't have any varnish on the model. I don't need to with the odorless spirit. It's not going to damage it at all. And I still get really nice capillary action, and it flows into the recesses easily, even without the gloss varnish. So this just makes it a little faster, and for doing a few tabletop minis, this is fine. I go pretty heavy on the black because I want some of the paint to form around the recesses and the details, and when it dries in a more pale brown, it'll just define the black a lot more. But yeah, focusing on, getting some definition with this oil wash is important, but you can see how easily it runs into all the recesses. And if you don't like anything you've done, you're just going to take some clean spirits and you can wipe it away. But I think this looks particularly good on this very pale ultramarine. The Infinity Mini benefited greatly, I think, from the oil wash, and there's a lot of detail, especially around the boots and things like that. And being able to accurately, carefully just define these edges was really nice using the oil wash. But yeah, it's looking really cool, I think, this Mini. I'm certainly appreciating the amount of detail in comparison to a Space Marine. I think once you've picked out all these details, then it's pretty rewarding, and they look, they're looking awesome. You can even add extra chips, streaks, and anything you want with the oil washes. When it's wet, it can look a little extreme, but you have to have a little bit of trust. When it dries, it will look a little different, but this just kind of comes from experience. But if you haven't tried oils before, it's amazing. It's really fun, and that's one of the reasons I use it, is it's enjoyable. And that's the same with the chipping. I like doing the chipping, I like adding the oil washes. It makes the process fun. You can see I add some thicker blobs of oil paint to the chest, and then with some clean thinner I can just rub those away to get some subtle streaking. And these have got a really nice translucency, so they're subtle. And when it's dry, you can see it is a little more subtle, and it just looks like a nice amount of dirt, but we've also, defined those recesses. And I think together with the two levels of chipping, the brown and the silver, that's a really nice amount of weathering for a relatively small time investment. When that's done, I do give them a coat of matte varnish, which isn't necessary, but I wanted the finish to be even all over mine. So where the oil wash goes on, it's slightly different to the paint, and it doesn't look bad. It looks pretty cool, but yeah, I just wanted to have a little bit of varnish, get it all nice and matte looking, and I think that'll help make it look cool. I'm going to finish with a really easy base just to make the model look finished, and I put some sand on the base and then gave it a wash with some of that burnt umber I already had on the palette. I recently got a rust and corrosion weathering powder set from Vallejo, so I thought I'll pick one of these. Some of them are really bright orange, so I ended up going for a darker one so it's not too crazy. And for these, I just take a little bit on a dry brush and just work them into the sand. And you don't need to use fixer or anything, just make sure you've really worked it into the sand and it will stick there pretty easily. But this certainly works well with the blue and is, obviously really, really simple. You might want to put some more work into your bases, but here on the channel, we like to do fast bases as we just want to show off the model most of the time. So a nice quick base, I think, nice and simple, just shows off the Mini. Last job is going to be painting that rim in some black, especially as there'll be powder all over it. And this just tidies it right up, and a nice finishing touch. And that is the end of the painting process. I wanted this video to be pretty sharp and fast, and I want the paint jobs to be like that too. I don't know how you guys feel, but sometimes you see box arts for minis like this, and they're so good, and I think they should be good to show off the minis, but it's kind of daunting and can be a little off-putting sometimes. Sometimes you just want to get them on the table and have fun, and that's what I wanted to do with this video really, is just do nice efficient techniques, show you that you don't need to do lots of airbrush highlights or lots of edge highlights, and you can do fun, fast things like weathering to make sure they're still interesting, but it doesn't have to take forever. As for the comparison, I really like the Infinity Mini. It's almost as tall as a Primaris, but the extra detail I think looks really great. I've done, a fast paint job, but I think if you wanted to, you could paint all the details on the Infinity model, and I think it would look absolutely fantastic, picking out all the separate parts on the leg. But you can do it in this simple way and get it on the table as well. So I quite like the versatility of that, of being able to do them, quickly and they'll still look good, but I could spend ages and make them look fantastic. I like Space Marines because they're plain and they're simple, but when you look at them side by side, I really love the realistic proportions of Infinity Minis. You know, the legs aren't too fat and over the top. They're just, yeah, they're more realistically proportioned. And yeah, I really like that element to them. So what's next for me and Infinity? Well, I've got this tag, which I absolutely love, and it goes with this faction. And that's one of the bigger models that you can have in your team. And yeah, they're just really cool models to paint. So I'd probably like to do this one with a lot more detail, maybe paint to a higher standard and put it over on Patreon or something like that. And I've also started painting the rest of the minis. I just did this one for the video and finished it off, but now I'm sure what the color scheme is. I can roll out the rest of them. But yeah, these are really cool, these other minis, and these have also got some fantastic artworks to go with them. So yeah, I'm looking forward to finishing these off. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it showed you some quick ways to do some army painting. And if you fancy trying out Infinity, they have got this fantastic new box set. Just check it out. It's really nice to paint some other miniature ranges sometimes, and I always like to mix it up and try different things. So I encourage you to do so. Let me know if you like Infinity, if you're a fan, or also comment if you haven't tried Infinity before, but maybe after watching this, you fancy giving it a go. I'd love to kind of hear what you guys think about this amazing model range. So yeah, leave a comment, and I look forward to reading those. I will see you next time, and there will be some more Infinity content in the future. See you then.